All right. So what we covered last time essentially was we started off with an introduction to LLMs, and then we jumped into the short courses from deeplearning.ai. And today I will do the same thing. I will do a recap of session 1, and then I will jump into these courses, show you how to set this up. It's really easy. That's one of the reasons why we selected this module, is that these courses are very easy to use. The setup is very simple, and you can start learning right away. And you can also learn it at your pace. So the idea is that in these sessions, we'll go over the background, we'll answer some questions, we'll introduce you how to use these courses, and then in between these sessions, you need to go to these courses and learn at your own pace. And then when we come for the next session, we can discuss what you learned. If you have any questions, if something was not clear, if something was interesting for you, we can discuss all of this. So in this hour, we're going to take time to do that discussion as well. So any questions so far? No? Okay, good. So let me then jump into the slides so that we can set up some background, some context. Okay, so I'm going to go in there. Okay, so these are the slides. I'm going to start presenting. All right. So today is the session number 2. And in this session, you're going to continue the work that we did in session 1. So session 1 recap. So we talked about the whole idea of generative AI, foundation models, large language models. How do they relate to each other, right? For most of you, it's like you already know that. So not going to spend much time. But if you need to stop me, just let me know. And then we talked about open models, open source models, and the not open source closed proprietary models. We talked a little bit about how to use these language models. And if you're just starting out, you use them as is. If you are at intermediate level, you can do certain things to adapt these models. And then if you have very advanced use cases, you can fine tune these models. We talked about the pros and cons of large and small models, and depending on your use case, which approach should you use. And then we jumped into the deeplearning.ai short courses. We talked about setup, learning, and we covered the first course of how to use OpenAI's API. And we did a little bit on prompt engineering, but we didn't really finish it. So we're still kind of early on in that. And then we had some Q&A. So what are we going to do today? So we'll continue with the course on prompting for with ChatGPT. The course has some good material that we started, but we didn't cover completely. If we are able to finish that course, then we can kind of get to the next topic, which is automation, orchestration, and workflows for LLMs using LangChains. If you're not familiar with LangChains, that's fine. We'll kind of go slow, start from the beginning, kind of talk about it, and then there's a course. There's actually 2 courses that are focused on LangChain. So we'll start with the first one. Most likely, we will not have time to go to do anything else. But even that one, each of these courses, they require about 1 to 2 hour minimum. But in my case, I usually pause them, take some time to kind of think about what the courses are offering, and then restart. So you can take your time to do that. So this is a recap of what we already covered. And if it's too basic, then you can ignore this one. But we started off with the concept of what are these foundation models? What are the pros and cons of pre-training them so you don't have to use your own labeled data? And what happens when you use data of different types? What does a foundation model do? How is it able to adapt to a lot of different kinds of tasks? And when these models are used with just text, whether it's natural language, numbers, or code, this results in the kind of foundation models which we call the large language models. But not all these models are ready out of the box to be used for following instructions. So if you look at these ellipses, the bigger one is the foundation models. So these are the models that can be trained. These are generalized, usually trained on large data sets and have a lot of parameters because they need to learn from large data sets. And these can be used for both generative and non-generative AI use cases. Right now, the generative use cases are where the most of the interest is. So obviously, there's a ton of interest in what can we generate with these. So these language models are one type of foundation models. There are image models, there are speech models, there's so many other kind of models. And then there's these GPT-4 kind of models, which do everything. So they are multimodal. And within these large language models, as you go through the course, you will learn that some of these language models are specially tuned for following instructions. And that is the biggest trick and the hardest thing to do with large language models. You can always create the model, and you can see that in open source world, we have a lot of new models being introduced, but not all of these models are carefully tuned for following instructions. ChatGPT is one of the models which has been tuned, and that's why it interacts with us in a very human-friendly way and comes up with answers, and it has a good understanding of what we are trying to do. So that's where we will go into prompting and figure out how to make the model do what we say using prompts. Last time we talked a little bit about these closed and proprietary models versus open source models, the pros and cons. And if you're attempting to use these models for a business specific use case or for your own company's proprietary data, then you have a number of choices. You have to figure out, do you want to retain control over the data? Do you want to spend a certain type of budget? Is the quality the main thing? What happens to a model that you have trained with your own data? Does it become your property, or does it stay with the original owner of the model? So all of these things determine which approach should you take. And we'll come back to this debate, but I think first you need to really understand some of the fundamentals of these models. And we'll go through some of those, but we will not go into a lot of the technical details like tokenizations and the limits and all those things. They will come over time and you will learn. But for now, the goal is to kind of stay within the scope of these short courses and cover those courses so you have fun. This is kind of a continuation of the debate from the previous slide of whether you're going to be using large models, small models, specialized models, all of that. In this slide, we didn't really have time to cover it in detail in the last session, but the idea here is that if you want to adapt or customize a model, you have a number of choices. And this illustration captures the trade-off between the cost and effort and what is the level of customization that you could achieve. So on the left side at the this corner, you have the easiest thing. You just prompt the model and you just use a good prompt as input to get an output that you need. So your effort is involved with creating a great prompt, maybe providing examples. This could be a very long prompt. And if you have a problem set where you need hundreds of prompts, this becomes sort of your exercise to create each of these prompts to find the best answer. Now, on the other extreme is that you build a model from scratch, which is extremely expensive and requires a lot of work. So in between, I have these like two blue boxes which are related to prompting. So on the left side of this vertical line, yes, Russell, you have a question?
Yeah, pardon me. I think some of us are having trouble seeing your slides. I think a lot of us are only seeing your first slide.
Okay, hold on. Let
Right.
me stop and then thank you for letting me know. Sometimes this happens on Zoom and I obviously have no idea till somebody tells me. Okay, how about now?
Yes, that's much better. Thank you.
Sure. So let me go back and see. Did you guys see this one? Like, what are we going to cover today? No. Okay. All right. So the good thing is we are doing recording. So when you see the recording, but let me go through it quickly. So in session 1, we just covered the fundamentals of foundation models, large language models, their customization, pros and cons, a lot of like high-level discussion around that before you even start doing anything, what are some of the things that you should think about, you should consider based on your specific needs, right? There is no one size fits all in, perfect model, though GPT-4 is the closest to what you have. But if you have a budget, if you have special needs, if you have security, privacy requirements, you need to really think about all this before you jump into the technical side of things. And in session 1, we went into the deep learning.ai courses, and I showed how to use them. And then we kind of went through a couple of those courses. In today's session, my goal is to kind of quickly go through that course that we already completed, and then continue with the course on prompt engineering that we did not finish and make some progress there. If we have time, then we can go to the next course, which is about lang chains. So I don't think we'll have time to do anything more. So let me jump right into it. And then I showed this slide, which you already should have from session 1, and I posted on the group, which kind of talks about the concept of foundation models, and they can take different types of data, and they are pre-trained, so you don't need to label the data. It can learn from unlabeled data because the data is huge, and then it can be ready to do a lot of different tasks. So unlike supervised learning in the past, you do not need to give it labeled data first, and you're not limited to just one task. It can do a lot of different things. So since we are talking about large language models, we are focused on this side of things where you have text, whether it's code, it's English, it's another language. It can read all of that, ingest all of that data, and learn from that. And once the foundation model has been pre-trained, it's generalized and it's able to be do a lot of different things. So within the universe of foundation models, language models are one subset. And within these language models, you have specialized language models which have been carefully fine-tuned to understand user instructions and follow them and answer those questions. So that's where it generates the text. So ChatGPT is the most popular, most famous example where it has really good understanding of what you're saying. If you say it carefully and then coming up with an answer, which is usually good, but there are obviously problems because the model is only as good as the data, and the way it was self-supervised means that it's not always able to come up with the answer which is correct or harmless. So that's a challenge with these models. And maybe also discuss the pros and cons of open source versus not open source. So the not open source means that models where you don't have a full view of the model architecture and weights, you don't have exact access to all of the data on which it was trained, you don't have control, you don't have visibility. And when you customize for these models, you also don't get access to the model in like 100% access. You can see the model, but you don't really have that ownership of that model. If you go with open source, the usual challenges are, yes, you get access to the code, weights, everything, but there's a lot of work needed to fine tune that model and host that model. So there's all kinds of challenges that come with those. So that's why there's the pros and cons. But there's a whole set of companies that will offer you various services to get over that. So the debate these days is like, do you go with this one big model that can do everything, or do you go with like specialized, customized models, or something in between? Okay. And finally, to this slide, which we were discussing a while ago, where on the left side of this vertical line are techniques that you can use with prompting to get the best possible answer for your user needs, right? So if you have a use case, you do not want to spend a lot of time and effort, you stay on the left side of this where you do things with the prompts. And we'll go over some of that. But researchers have come up with really interesting ways to do very cost-effective tuning without changing the model. So on the left side of this line are all the things you can do without making a change to the model weights or so that's why it's cost effective. Because when you have a model with, let's say, 100 billion or even 20 billion parameters, just imagine when you're changing the weights and all of that, the model has to be retrained, a lot of calculations have to be done. So that's where the expense comes up. So this is where on this right side of this line, you have model fine tuning, where you change some of the model parameters and layers. And if you increase the changes to the model, then you're going to the right side. And between this box and this box, you can have a whole spectrum. You can change as many as you want. But the problem is, you really don't know how good the new model will be, but you end up doing the training and you spend a lot of time preparing the data and then customizing the model. So it's an expensive exercise. So obviously the recommendation is start from the left side, see how good the model performs, try more examples, do this prompt tuning. If still the model is not going to give you good results, and if you have the budget, then you start with a smaller fine tuning. And again, data is a key here. And then even with the models, there are models that are small, there are models that are mid-sized, and there are models that are huge. So which model to choose is always a challenge, because you don't want to start with the largest model, but then the smaller models sometimes are not good. So it all depends on what's your specific use case and what kind of things can you achieve with the smaller ones. Okay. So before we jump into the courses, I want to really take a few moments to kind of talk about the limitations of large language models. So there are many that are well known, but then there are some which can be easily missed. But obviously, the well-known limitations are that models like ChatGPT, they were fine-tuned for following instructions, but this fine-tuning was done using human feedback, which was a large-scale effort. So even though you didn't have to use labeled data in the beginning, towards the end of the model training, it needed help from humans. So right now that training was like a snapshot in time, end of 2021. So now the model doesn't have that kind of understanding of the world beyond that. And then there are security and other issues. Of course, the challenge that the model fabricates results. It's not always factually correct. And you don't really know when the model is going to do that. That puts you in a really odd spot where if you want to use it for some high profile use case, and you know that maybe 2-3% of the time the model is just going to come up with some made up answers. That's why when you use a number of these models, there's always a disclaimer that, hey, this could be wrong, inaccurate, or something. And right now, there's really no good solution around that. There are some things that you can do in terms of building guardrails and checking the results before you present them to the final user. And currently in ChatGPT and all, they have built a lot of those filters and guardrails, both input and output. And I think that's going to be the case with a lot of these virtual assistants and things that are being built using LLMs as the foundation. Now, what's happening is that since the ChatGPT's introduction, there has been like almost 6 months, right? Maybe more, 7 months. There's a lot of work has happened on the open source side to address some of the LLM limitations and to extend its functionality. So that's part of that is LangChain, which we're going to touch upon today. And then ChatGPT itself came up with like the concept of plugins, which are much like browser plugins, extend the functionality. So these plugins were developed by ChatGPT's partners, like I think some of them for math, some of them were for using internet to kind of look for answers on the browser, things like that. And then recently, ChatGPT has also introduced its own thing called function calling, through which more people can actually create these plugins and functions. And then prompt tuning is an area where there's a lot of research to kind of go over some of the basic limitations. And then there are known risks, security risks with these models, depending on where you get them from. And if you're creating all these plugins, that means that you can always get bad results, and people can hack these, do all kinds of prompt injections to kind of create problems. Okay. So this is the a snapshot of, if you go to deeplearning.ai in short courses for generative AI, you will see a bunch of these courses. So I'm only showing these 4 which are LLM related. Okay. So by now you should be like enrolled in these ones. So when we kind of start working on it, you should have your own view, and then you can try it out. So just when we did the first session 2 weeks ago, there were 3 courses. And I think just this week, they've added the LangChain chat with your data, because this is a very, very common, very popular thing. So they've added this one. There's another course which is about diffusion models for image creations. So maybe we'll get to that after we finish this one. Okay. So we'll jump into these courses in a minute. But before we do that, I just wanted to give you, you know, a view of all these 4 courses. So when we started last week, we went over the main idea of how to use these models, how to use the API, and how to get the outputs, look at them. And then we kind of went over the prompt engineering part a little bit, and we went through a few of those, but the course kind of goes into a number of ways to achieve different results for summarizing, inferring, transforming. And after this course is done, you have a pretty good idea of using prompt engineering as a developer. But you can take the same concepts, even if you're not a developer, and use them with different LLMs, especially with ChatGPT. And then the course for LangChain, this is like the introductory course, kind of gives you an overview of what LangChains are and talks about the problems that it solves, the different LLMs that it can connect to, how can it be an orchestration layer for doing different things, with language models being like one part of that whole workflow. And then the final course, now I haven't looked at this course, the LangChain chat with your data, but essentially my understanding is that if you have your own documents and you want to train the model so that it reads your documents and then answers questions based on those models, based on those data and documents, then this kind of tells you how to load those documents, split them, how to store the data so that you can use it for what's called retrieval augmented generation, RAG. So it kind of introduces you to some of the vector stores and embeddings. But so this is a really, really good and useful course, but it will take us a little bit to kind of get there. So let me pause here and see if you have any comments, questions. All good? I haven't looked at the chat. Let me see if there's something there. Some messages. Stop on them. Okay. So I think there was a question about fine-tuning. So yes, the fine-tuning essentially, there are 2 ways in which fine-tuning is used. One is that, when you have these language models that people are developing, they can fine-tune these models to follow instruction. But that's not something that, as ordinary developers and end users, we don't really get into that. That's a very specialized way. What I mean by fine-tuning is that you take an open source model or even a ChatGPT model, and then you use it with your own data so that the model has the specialized knowledge that is part of your data. So let's say you're a financial services company, you have some documents which are very technical in nature. They have a lot of terms that ordinary models may not understand. Maybe it's your own organizational specific data that nobody in the world has access to. So when you train the model with that kind of data, and it could be hundreds of thousands of documents, now what you get is you have a fine-tuned custom model that has the ability to work with your data. So obviously, for that kind of work, you may not want the data to leave your network, or you may not want that data to be shared with anyone else. So that's where fine-tuning requires, it's not just that you can use a certain technique and get the fine-tuning. There are a lot of other business and security challenges that come with fine-tuning. So that's its overall picture. So I'm going to now jump into the course itself and going to share my other windows. Hopefully you guys can now see that I'm in the first build systems with ChatGPT AI. So I'm going to maximize that one. All right. So in this course, since we covered it in session 1, not going to spend much time on it, but just kind of go over the couple of things so that in case you are new, you're not completely lost. So the course basically has some content in the video form, and then there's a code window. So over here, I'll just slide that over there. You have code on the left, and then there's a video on the right. So you can play the video, and it's going to take you through the code and going to give you some overview. So of course, we don't have time to go over the whole thing, but I think what you see is that it will give you some overview, and so you should definitely watch these videos on your time if you have not watched that. And it's good to kind of go through the sequence that I have it laid out. Initially, they had the sequence all like different, but this is the basic course that you need. And now the nice thing is that if you were working on your own and you were using an online notebook or your own notebook, you will have to first sign up with OpenAI to get an API key. You have to set up the environment. You have to do some imports. But in this case, it's pretty much done for you. So this is an embedded window, and it has already connected, and all of this work has been done. So you can pretty much go to each of these and just run these and keep going. And it will start, working for you. In this case, it's giving some sort of an error. Oh, because I didn't run this first one, obviously. So this is the way you will run it. So it's pretty straightforward, right? Just go from the first box and just keep running this. And of course, if you're a developer, then it's like kind of boring, kind of walk you through these things. But if you're not, so with this one, hopefully you have a pretty good idea of how to use these courses. And I've looked at a bunch of courses, and I think this you cannot get anything better than this, because they do most of the work for you. All you have to do is to watch the video, and while you're watching, follow the code, pause the video so that you can do some code running, and you can change some of these things and kind of go and follow that, and you should be all set. Any questions on this? No questions? Okay, good. So as you go through these, you will see that they have modules for doing the key LLM capabilities like classification, right? So if you have a text and you want to classify it for, let's say, A, B, or C, or sentiments or something, then this shows you how to do that with the, obviously it's only about ChatGPT AI API. So this is what you're going to get. So it kind of walks you again every time you go through the process. And then once you have loaded all the dependencies and you have defined a function, then it shows you how to create a delimiter, how to create a message so that you can use it as a prompt, the role of the user and the system, like a user message, and how to compose a message, how to get a response. And in the video, they explain kind of everything from start and kind of take you through the step-by-step process. Obviously, some background information is obviously needed to understand how this thing is working. But once you understand that part, you can come back and you can make changes here and rerun these code with different inputs and change whatever you like and see how well it runs or if you have any function. So not going to go through all of these, but basically there's examples for different kinds of capabilities. Every time I click that, it kind of reloads that code, the new code. That's why it takes a little bit of time. But the thing I want to show is essentially prompting, because that's sort of the key through which you go. This one's taking a bit of time to load. So I'm just going to go directly to the chaining prompts. So this is chaining prompts is when you kind of go from one prompt to another one. And let me see if I can get the video to load.
Following complexity. Chaining prompts, on the other hand, is like cooking a meal on stages, where you focus on one component.
So you see how the video is explaining the concept of why do you need to chain these prompts, giving you some analysis, and then showing some slides in case of like how do you create a state of workflow, how to get back. So all of these videos are going to be key to your understanding of these code. And then when we go to the next code, which is about prompt engineering, you can build on these skills. So as we talked a little bit a while ago, these models have limitations in even like input. Like, for example, you cannot go above a certain limit. So think of it like, you want to feed thousands of words to the model. At some point, the model is going to say, okay, I cannot take any more input data. Like you've exceeded your limit. So what do? You kind of split the document in different smaller documents, and now you start feeding them one after the other. So that becomes a chain. And when we go to the lang chain, that even gives you a much better way. But before that, we just learn a few of the basic things about prompts and how to kind of create some of those prompts, how to use templates, because templates allow you to create a structured way to work with the models so that you don't have to start from scratch every time, right? So this simple concept of templates, whether you use a Word template, Excel template, just like that, you can use templates, right? So I am going to go now to the next course. Hopefully it's there. Okay, so this is the next course. Oh, yeah. So this is the next course where we are now doing the ChatGPT prompt engineering. And they give you an introduction, they'll give you some guidelines. And in these guidelines, why the code is not loading on this side. Okay, here's good. So in these guidelines, they create some helper function, and then they kind of walk you through some of those prompting principles. So very simple things like write clear and specific instructions. What does it mean? So basically helping the model think. So you say things like, hey, here's what you want the model to do. And then in the output, you can tell the model that I want the output in HTML format, markdown format, or a JSON. And then the model will give you what the model thinks is a good JSON. But if you want the JSON to be of a specific structure, you tell the model. Like in this case, it's just saying do certain things. But if you, let me see. So now you are giving the model more structure. So if in this example, they're using summarization. and you're saying summarize the following text and then translate the summary, then list each name, and then output a JSON format object that contains the following keys: friend summary and the num names. So essentially, you're kind of instructing the model, but you're also adding some of the details for things so that it's not like completely unstructured, right? And then even in the end, you're saying things like separate your answers with line breaks. So this is like a really basic way to limit the model on what it's doing, giving it structure, and getting answers the way that you want. Okay? And I encourage you to kind of try these out. If you follow this one, it's pretty much what we did in the first short course, like your summarizations, inferring and transforming, if you transform the data from one to another. But now you're doing it not just with a simple prompt, but more like a structured prompt, more detailed instructions and things like that. And once you go through all of these exercises, let me go to the chatbot one. Then it shows you how you can even create your own chatbot using ChatGPT's AI. Because there are times when you want to control how the chat goes. So that's where you can even do this. So that's also based on understanding how the ChatGPT's API works and how prompts can change its behavior. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause to look at some of the questions in the chat and then see. Okay, so chat, okay. Let's see. So I think there are some questions about running models on your own machines. So I have not tried running a large model, but I think obviously the benefit is that you can avoid the cost, but in terms of performance, it's going to be a hit. So it's going to be slower, and the models that will run on a smaller machine with a GPU are obviously not the larger models. So there will be limitations with those. But again, it's not always that the larger models are the best ones. So if you have a specific need and you have a specialized model, definitely you can run it. It will work, and it may give you good results. So it all depends on your use case and how well you can support it with that. All right. So once we are done with the session, then I will kind of download the recording and see if I can upload it on YouTube, and then I'll share the link in the same LinkedIn group where we had the slides up before. And in case you run into some difficulty, you don't remember anything, just find Dallas AI on LinkedIn and either leave a comment or message us, or even if you go to Meetup page. But I would say that the Meetup site is not very good in terms of sending messages and all that. So sometimes they get lost, sometimes I don't see them. So best thing is to use LinkedIn and reach out to us, and we should be able to kind of get you some of that information. All right. So before I go on, any questions? No? Okay, let me see why I didn't. I want to see if I can reload it. Video.
But one of the key things is you can also use a large language model to build a custom chatbot. So maybe play the role of like a custom service agent, or like order taker for restaurants. because we didn't know how to do that.
I'm going to describe the components of the OpenAI chat completion format in more detail, and then you're going to build a chatbot yourself. So let's get into it. So first, we'll set up the OpenAI Python package as usual. So
So somehow, the code is not loading here. So I'm just going to jump. I'm just going to let you try that on your own time. And I will go into the LangChain part. So at least, today I want to introduce you to the LangChain concept because this is one of the most important, most useful ways. And so let me, So in terms of LangChain, think of it as an open source library that allows you to extend large language models and interact with the rest of the internet and the tools and functions that are available. Before LangChain, language models were sort of in an isolation.
LangChain, so we'll talk about.
So this guy who's talking, he created LangChain. So it integrates with a number of LLMs, and even with the text embeddings, it provides you prompt templates. It helps you with doing a lot of the basic things that you need when working with text data, like splitting the data, and making sure you have a good quality input. And then it also helps you with indexing, which is really key to have the data available for the model. So now you are going a little bit behind the scenes and doing some of the things that usually data engineers do with this language, and it's helping you with all of that. So moving forward, and then the chain part is where it helps with the workflow part. So you have a bunch of building blocks that you want to connect together. And let me show you the diagram. But before we go there, the agent part is really important. So agent is what is doing the intelligent orchestration between the LLMs and the rest of the tools and applications. So there are many times when you want the result from an LLM, and then that result should feed into an application. That application may process it, and it may even go to another LLM for doing something else, right? So this is where LangChains become very, very helpful. I'm going to go to the next one. I went too far, maybe. So you have these components, and let me see if there is.
We're also grateful to Ankush Golda, who is Harrison Chase, Geros and Hoping, right? Jeff Lodwick.
Okay, this is just, we can go to the next one there where you have the. Hopefully it will load so we can kind of show it, but let me show you the part, at least in the video, we can see the code even if it doesn't load. But essentially what it's teaching you is how to create these templates so that you don't have to redo the whole thing every time. Let's see. So as you can see here, LangChain library has prompts, and then you can use the chat prompt template to create a template that can be reused with these input output variables, and you can add some instructions to it. So once you have a template, all you have to do is to call that template and just change the input and output parameters of that function, and that allows you to kind of simplify your code. And I think what we'll do in the next session, almost out of time here, is that I will preload some of these so we don't run into this difficulty. But we'll start with the model prompts and parsers module and run that together. We'll look at some of the memory challenges with these models, how to create these chains, and then how to do these agents. I can probably, just get the code in a separate notebook so that it becomes easier. So I think there are probably a lot of users on this one also that may have caused some backend issues on there. Now, for the next sessions, what I'll do is we can also look at the ChatGPT's plugins. And I'll share that in the deck. So if you have time, you can see how other people have used these plugins. Function calling within ChatGPT. So you can then kind of, call different functions like send an email, or in this case, checking the weather using some sort of an API. So there's like these steps. And once you're done with this, and if you even want more, then there is also this new course on Coursera with AWS, which has a lot more depth. So the ones that we were doing now are the short courses. This one is like a 3-week course, and it uses AWS infrastructure in the backend. So you can kind of see it requires about 15 hours to complete. So that's another thing that we can do in these sessions, but we may have to do more than 1 hour sessions. We may have to kind of shift the time to evening, maybe start after 5 Central, kind of do a 2-hour session so we can cover more. And then there are, a whole lot of other resources that I can add, but essentially it's a lot of like, prep work for everyone between these sessions, because, with these 1-hour sessions, we're not able to just go into a lot of those details. So to kind of recap, we looked into the model APIs, we looked into the prompting, and then we just touched upon the LangChain concept. So I'll share the material, and then I know that it looks like some of you are at advanced levels, you're running models, and you're just sharing some of that information, which is great. And just remember that some of the models that are available out there are not licensed for commercial use, like the llamas and others. They're only used for non-commercial use cases. So that's so you can experiment with and run with that, but really can't use them for commercial applications. So it's just note about not all open sources like completely free and ready to go. So we're out of time. Unless there are any more questions, I will say, thank you, and then kind of let's see, end the recording.